Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I think we're going to get started. I know people are still joining slowly, but I want to be mindful of the people who are here. So we're going to get started. Welcome, everyone, to the last Women's Beit Midrash of the season. We'll be back in September, God willing, and hopefully we'll be doing it in person. And we're considering having a Zoom. We're going to have a Zoom component as well. We'll have to figure out how that technology all works, but we will figure that out. In any case, we're excited tonight to have Mrs. Shifra Rabenstein with us for the last program of the season. And she, of course, is the renowned speaker and educator, as well as the granddaughter of Rabbi and Mrs. Marcus. She received her BA in Judaic Studies from Stern College and earned her master's degree in school administration from Johns Hopkins University. She currently teaches in Baltimore's Women's Institute of Torah Seminary and Beis Yaakov High School of Baltimore. She lectures for women and high school girls across the country. And of course, I want to give a big thank you to all our generous sponsors: Anonymous, the Koppelman, Friedman, Kessel, Levitan, and Rosazada families, in memory of their parents and grandparents, Binyamin ben Yisrael and Gittel Devorah Bas Dov Ber. Also, a special thank you to Dori and Rich Sobin on the 9th yortzeit of Dori's mother, Sarah Yocheved Bat Yehuda Eliyahu, and Andrea and Ronnie Sultan for the 30th yortzeit of, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Duba Leah Bas Shlomo, a childhood friend of Mrs. Marcus's. So thank you again to all our generous sponsors. Tonight's shir is on Through the Looking Glass, the Jewish calendar as a mirror for life. Without further ado, here is Mrs. Rabenstein.
Okay. So last week I participated in a planning meeting for our school calendar for the high school that I work in. It was not a calendar meeting in terms of deciding when we should or should not have school. It was specifically a programming meeting. And at that meeting, there were about 7 of us around the table trying to figure out how we should appropriately space the extracurricular programming that we offer in school. And there were many different opinions, as there tend to be at meetings of Jewish people. But one thing was a common theme amongst everybody. Despite the different opinions on exactly how it should lay out, everybody's goal was the same. And that was to space the programming appropriately and properly throughout the year. So we shouldn't have any one span of time that has all the extracurricular programming in it, while we have many other months that are empty. So I want to show you something that I, at first glance, think is a little bit strange. I'm going to share my screen with you. And if you take a look here, you'll notice that this is an image of the cycle of our calendar, our Jewish calendar, our holiday calendar. It starts in Pesach, which represents the month of Nisan, which the Torah tells us is the first month, and takes us through climbing towards Shavuos, through the summer into Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and we'll add Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah to that. And then the entire other half of the year is what we'll call the winter months. And you'll notice that I made a line down the middle, and the reason for that line is because really, according to the layout of the Chumash, all of our holidays are in one half of the year, which honestly seems pretty strange. Because if I were part of that planning meeting, I never would have placed all of the holidays on one half of the year. I would definitely have spaced them out. And even if you want to argue that subsequently Chazal added Chanukah and Purim, which they did to help us get through the winter. I don't know about you, but if I were making teams, I would call those unfair teams. Why is there Pesach, Shavuos, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shmini Atzeres on one team, and the other side gets Chanukah and Purim? That doesn't really seem very balanced. And that's really, that structural question is the one I'd like to base our discussion tonight. That's the one upon which I'd like to base tonight's conversation. What is the meaning or significance of the structure of our calendar? Why is it that we seem to have so much packed in here? And what is really the purpose of all of this empty space on the other side? And in fact, I'll strengthen the point. I'll strengthen the point by reminding you of source number 2. Source number 2 is a piece from Rav Dessler's famous Michtav Me'Eliyahu, 4-volume set, although now there are 5 volumes because they printed an extra, but a multi-volume set with the writings of Rav Eliyahu Dessler. And in there, he shares a rather well-known point. And that is, and I'm just going to read the first line together. Ki ein zman over aleinu. Time does not pass over us. Ella, rather, anu holchim bitocho. We walk through it. Meaning that time is not an experience where we just sit and it flashes before us, but we are supposed to march through time, making something of it and tapping into the potential energy as we go. And so if you reflect on this cycle that we just looked at up here, it's not just that these are when our holidays are. It's that each holiday is an opportunity to tap into an existing spiritual potential. And if that's the case, then clearly I'm supposed to do some sort of preparation in order to get myself there. So then let's strengthen the point. Why would we place all of that potential energy into just half the year, from Nisan to Tishrei? What is supposed to be happening from Tishrei to Nisan? So, in order to start our journey, I'd like to point out that the luminary upon which we base our calendar, that being the moon, actually follows a similar pattern, a similar structure. So if you read with me in source number 3, Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, in The Warmth and the Light, the outstanding characteristic of the Jewish calendar is that it is a lunar calendar rather than a solar calendar. Our sages find in this fact more than a mere method of computing time. They find in it a reference to the passage of Israel through the ages, as it is distinguished from the passage of any other nation in the annals of history through the millennia. Atem monim lo ve'ein umot ha'olam monim lo. You, the Jewish people, count your time, your days, your months according to the moon, and the rest of the world does not. Now, before I go on, I just want to pause for a minute, because I'd like to acknowledge that we know that that's not really exclusively true. We are not the only religion or nation that bases itself on the moon. The Muslims also base themselves on the moon. In fact, one could even argue that the Muslims are a more pure version of use of a lunar calendar than we are, because we, in a sense, merge the lunar and solar calendar. Because while we do base our months on the moon, we account for the seasons which are based on the sun. That's why we have leap years like the one coming up, because we don't want it to be that Rosh Hashanah gets any earlier than Labor Day. That's quite enough. We don't want Rosh Hashanah to end up in the summer or back in April. The Muslims don't balance it with a leap year. They never add a month. And that's why, just as an example, their holy month of Ramadan can sometimes be in the summer, and a couple of years later it could be in the spring, and a number of years after that it could be in the winter. And it moves around because the lunar calendar is, as we know, shorter than the solar calendar. So one could argue that we are not even the best example of a lunar calendar. So what I'd like to suggest, and I think that the next paragraph that we'll read together will support it, what I'd like to suggest is that Chazal do not mean to tell us that we are the only nation that bases its holidays and itself on the lunar calendar, on the moon itself, but that we are the only nation that we ourselves are based on the moon. It's not just that our calendar counts according to the moon. It's that we, our personal selves, follow a pattern that is established by the moon. Let's read together a little bit further. What is the symbolic difference between reckoning according to the moon and reckoning according to the sun? The sun rises in all its glory at dawn, traverses the heavens in its full blaze of light, and plunges below the horizon as day gives way to night. The moon, on the other hand, is first perceived as a thin crescent of light, hardly illuminating the enveloping darkness. Then, as night follows upon night, it waxes continually in size and brightness until the middle of the month, when it reaches its zenith with the full moon. No sooner has it attained this stage than it begins to wane until, at the end of the month, it is once again barely visible. It seems to have dwindled away while darkness reigns supreme, and yet, the next night, it renews itself once more and begins the same cycle. That's the cycle of the moon. That's the cycle that the Jewish people follow. That's the pattern that the Jewish people follow. We wax and we wane. The moon upon which our calendar is based actually follows the same pattern of our calendar itself, where there are sometimes periods of highs of spirituality, of light, and there are sometimes periods of darkness that feel like emptiness. Sometimes periods of greatness, and sometimes periods where we feel the smallness of the time. As the Netivot Shalom writes in source number 4, the Inyan Yisrael, Monin Lilevanahu, this whole topic of understanding what it means that the Jewish people count according to the moon is Shehalvana yesh zmanim shehi b'shai hachoshech. The moon has times that it is in the peak of darkness. Ve'ein ro'im ba shum nitzutz shel or, and we do not see even a spark of its light. Ach gam b'shai hachashchut, but even in the peak of darkness, Yud'im shehi tatchil shuv leha'ir kevarishona. There's one thing we know about the moon, that even in its peak, in its height of darkness, we know it will once again begin to grow. It will shine light as it did before. V'tachzor limelo'ah, and it will return to its full state. Kach heim chayei am Yisrael. Such is the life of the Jewish people. Ratzuf zmanim shel choshech ve'afila. Sometimes we have an ongoing period of darkness. Rov yamehem begaliot v'sovlim tzarot rabot v'raot. Many days of exile, ongoing days of endless hardship that is overwhelming. Ach Yisrael monin lelvana, but the Jewish people are counted in accordance with the moon. Va'af b'shai hachashchut, even in the peak of its darkness. Yod'im sheshuv yashuvu laha'ir kevarishona. There's one thing we know about the Jewish people. We ain't going nowhere. We might find ourselves in the peak of darkness, but we will shine again. Somehow we always rebound. Somehow we always come back. But it is more than that. Because it is not just that we know that the darkness will end. It's not just that we believe in our capacity to shine light again when it seems dark. It's that we shine light even when it's dark. Take a look in the underlined area. V'chazal dimu inyan zeh sheYisrael monin l'levana ve'aku monin l'chama. Chazal compare this whole idea that the Jewish people count according to the moon and the Gentiles of the world count according to the sun. Dehachama sholetet bayom, that the sun reigns during the day, ve'eina sholetet balayla, and it does not rain at all. It is completely not visible at night. Ve'halavana, but the moon, sholetet balayla ubayom. There's one thing about the moon that's different. Its light may not always be as bright, but you can sometimes even see it during the day. It has the ability to be visible both by day and by night. Because the Jewish people do not only produce in good times. Because the Jewish people do not only produce at the peak of light and brightness. The Jewish people know how to produce even when it's dark and gloomy. And if I can refer you to the last two lines here of Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, which I think sums up this point. The Jewish people, unlike other nations, does not progress only in the brightness of day. On the contrary, even in the darkest of exiles, the Jews' true commitment is demonstrated. And isn't that the story of Jewish history? It's our ability to rejuvenate. It's our capacity to rebuild, even from the darkest tragedies, that seems to just be who we are and what we do. So I want to share with you a Gemara and Baba Basra. Now, a number of years ago when I spoke in person in West Orange, I shared this Gemara. So for those of you who remember it, Yasher Koach for remembering something from a shir that long ago. And Chazar is a good thing. And for those of us who don't, Chazar is a good thing. But I think it's an incredibly important Gemara. The Gemara says that Keshecharav Habayit Bishnia Rabu Pirushin BiYisrael, there were a number of people in Klal Yisrael who completely separated themselves. Shalol achol basar v'shalol ishtot yayin. They completely separated themselves, that they were no longer eating meat and no longer drinking wine. Nitfalahem Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Yoshua approached them and he said, "This is crazy." Amar lahem. He said to them, "Mipnei ma iaten ochlim basar ve'einatem shosin yayin." Why in the world are you not eating any meat and not drinking any wine? I'm not talking during the 9 days. I'm talking ever, 12 months a year. You never eat meat and you never drink wine? Why not? Amru lo, they said to Rabbi Yoshua, Nochal basar shemimenu makrivin al gabe mizbeach ve'achshav batel. We're going to eat meat that used to be brought on the base on the mizbeach in the base hamikdash, and now we don't have it. What's wrong with us? What's wrong with you? How could a person possibly bring themselves to eat meat? Isn't it too painful? Nishte yayin sheminaschin al gabe hamizbeach. We're gonna drink wine they used to be poured on the mizbeach, the achshav batel, and now we can't do it anymore. Amar lahem, Rabbi Yoshua said, I just want to point something out to you. If that's going to be your approach, im kain, lechem lo nochal, so let's not eat any bread. Shekvar batlu menachos, we don't have menachos anymore. Efshar b'peiros? Could you possibly bring yourselves to eat fruit? Peiros lo nochal. So they said, you're right, we won't eat fruit. Shekvar badlu bikurim, because we can't bring bikurim to the Beis HaMikdash. And since it's so painful that we can't bring bikurim to the Beis HaMikdash, we won't eat fruit either. Mayim lo nishteh. We shouldn't even drink water anymore. Shekvar batul nisuch hamayim, because we don't have the nisuch hamayim that they used to do on Sukkot by the Simchas Beis HaShoeva. And the Gemara says one last word, shasku. They were quiet. Because at that moment they realized that this approach is not an approach. At that moment they realized they can't accomplish this way. We can't just shut down. And really that was part of the message of Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Yoshua saying to them, you think this is the only time in Jewish history Klal Yisrael are going to experience a tragedy? Unfortunately, we know that one of the reasons we mourn so deeply by the Churban Beis HaMikdash, when we commemorate the 3 weeks, is because every tragedy we experience is an outgrowth of that tragedy. You think this is the last time Klal Yisrael are going to experience something hard? You know, sometimes they're going to throw rocks at us, and sometimes they're going to burn our books, and sometimes they're going to throw our people nebuch into ovens. But that's not what a Jew does. We don't shut down. We pick ourselves up and we move forward. And I'll tell you something amazing. If you read further on the same Daf Gemara, I didn't put it on the sheet, but if you read forward on the same Daf Gemara in the Gemara in Baba Basra, the Gemara goes on to say, so if that's not the appropriate way to mourn the Beis HaMikdash, so what is? And the Gemara gives a number of examples. I want to share 2 of them with you. One of them is when I build or paint a new home, I leave an empty space, and we call that space Zecher L'Chorban. We commemorate the destruction by leaving a space unfinished. And the Gemara says that when a chassan walks down to his chuppah, when a groom walks down to his chuppah, we put ashes on his forehead. The common denominator between both is that both are in the context of building. You're right, we mourn. You're right, we feel sadness, but we don't shut down. That's not how we respond. We pick ourselves up and we build. Yes, we don't have a Beis HaMikdash. And we'll remember that the house I live in outside of Israel, outside of Eretz Yisrael, is not a perfect house. And I'll remember that at the greatest simcha by a wedding, there is something missing, because the world lacks the Beis HaMikdash. But we will move forward and we will continue to build, because that's the story of Jewish history. That's what we do. That's who we are. What I'd like to suggest is that the pattern which is established by the cycle of the moon, and the pattern which is reflected in the structure of our calendar, that pattern of dark and light, fullness and emptiness, is also the pattern of our lives. The great Musar personality, Rabbi Shlomo Volbe, writes based on an earlier writing of a book called the Sefer HaYashar. Rav Volbe describes that there is a pattern in life that he calls the Yemei Ahava and Yemei Sin'ah, days of love and days of hate. What does that mean? It means that there are some days where I feel like life is wonderful. I'm inspired. I'm flying. I love everyone and I feel loved. And there are times where I just feel disconnected. There are times where I feel incredibly spiritual, and there are times where I feel incredibly empty. There are times where I feel incredibly connected, and there are times where I feel incredibly disconnected from people, from God. And there's nothing wrong with me. That pattern, says Rav Wolbe, is a normal pattern with which human beings were created. That there are ups and there are downs. That there are highs and there are lows. That there are days where we feel on top of the world and there are days where we don't. There are days where we feel connected and there are days where we feel disengaged. And as women, I think we particularly are sensitive to this. We have a biological process that mirrors that pattern. But all human beings go through these highs and lows, these ups and downs, these times of closeness and connection and times of distance and disconnection. The cycle of the moon, the cycle that has periods of light and periods of mostly darkness, does not just mirror the cycle of the Jewish people as a whole. It mirrors a cycle that each and every one of us experiences. And that cycle is perfectly normal. Sometimes we feel lots of ava, and sometimes we feel a certain amount of sinna. The key is not to give up and let go during those yemei sinna. I'll share with you the words of Rav Wolbe. The words of Rav Wolbe from his work, the Alei Shur. We're looking now in source number 6 and the underlined piece. Hinenu lomdim mikan ki chiluf matzavei haruach davar tiv'ihu. This flipping sometimes, this natural turning of a person, the spirit with a person feels is normal. It's natural. Ve'ein lihityaesh klal, and don't give up. Hityaesh from the word yeush, which means to abandon, to give up. Don't give up. Behagia yemei hasin'ah, when we come to those days of sinah where I just feel disconnected, and I don't feel good about what I do. Kemo kain, ein gam latzeit legamre mikol ha'avoda b'yamim elu. Don't stop doing everything that you do just because right now you don't feel it. Ki im yaniach hakol yovad mimenu. Because if we give up on everything, then it'll be lost. Know that the pattern is normal. Don't let go. If you skip to this next paragraph, beginning with the word ulam, ulam yudi'azu levada, just this knowledge. Ki hitchalfut yemei ha'avav yemei ha'sin'ah davar tiv'ihu. That the switching back and forth, that sometimes I feel inspired and I love everything that I do. Sometimes I feel uninspired and I really don't like what I'm doing. It's normal and it's natural. Sometimes just knowing that it's normal helps to alleviate the sadness and the desire to give up. Just knowing that it's normal. I have this sometimes even with teaching, where sometimes I go through periods of time where I feel like I love what I do and I'm definitely in the right business. And sometimes I feel like I really don't think I'm good at this anymore. I'm probably in the wrong business. I probably do not belong in a classroom. I should probably give up. And I have a friend who she and I sometimes call each other to energize each other when we go through these, what I think are normal patterns, and we all experience in different parts of our lives in different ways. And to even strengthen the point, I think that if we pay attention, we notice it really just about everywhere. that it's part of how Hashem made us. It's part of the natural way of the world, even in the physical sense. We go through periods of time where we feel a spark, we feel energized, and then it normalizes and it gets into a lull. We wake up in the morning and we turn on that light for the first time, and we're squinting because the light feels so bright, and then our pupils adjust, and it doesn't feel so bright anymore, and it normalizes. It's true of relationships, it's true of projects, it's true of any novelty. Ask a teenager who just got his license to run an errand for you. He will gladly do it. Ask a second grader who just got a new watch what time it is. Ask them every 60 seconds. They'll be happy to answer you. When there's novelty, when there's newness, when there's freshness, it's sharp and it's alive, and then time passes and it doesn't feel so bright and it doesn't feel so exciting. It's a natural pattern. It's a natural pattern that the freshness is not ongoing. Take a look with me. We're going to read together in source number 7, Living Inspired by Rabbi Akiva Tatz. We are incapable of maintaining the freshness of any experience naturally. Only in the dimension of miracle is that possible. The sacrificial bread in the Beis Hamikdash, the temple, remained steaming fresh permanently to manifest the constant freshness of Hashem's relationship with the Jewish people. But the natural pathway is that things which are fresh become stale. The reason that's a miracle is because it's not normal. Leave a piece of cake on the counter for a week, aside from the other problems that you may encounter, the cake will be stale. Novelty wears off. The same exists of so many things. Source number 8. A person is inspired artificially at the beginning of any phase of life. But to acquire the depth of personality which is demanded of us, Hashem removes the inspiration. And here's why this discussion is so important. Yes, it's important to know that the pattern exists, but understand a sneak peek at what is happening during the lull. What is happening on the other side of that calendar, of that cycle? What is happening in the other half of that month? The danger is apathy and depression. The challenge is to fight back to the point of inspiration, and in doing so, to build it permanently into one's character. Unfortunately, most people do not know this secret. We are misled into thinking that the world is supposed to be a constant thrill, and we feel only half alive because it is not. When there's an expectation that life is going to be all inspiring all the time, we think something's wrong with us when it's not that way. When there's an expectation that relationships are going to be all on a high all the time, we think there's something wrong with our relationships when they're not that way. When we think that our relationship with God is supposed to feel inspired every moment, every day, we think there's something wrong with me or we're with religion when it's not that way. But the reality is that there are cycles that we go through. And that sometimes the greatest growth is not only when we're feeling inspired, but sometimes it's when we're feeling uninspired. Let's read together source number 9. In the Netivot Shalom. B'chol matzav sheyehudi nimtza, in every scenario and situation in which a Jew finds himself, gam b'matzavim hagaruim biyoter, even in the worst of circumstances. Ratzon ha'alyon hu sheyimtza et haderech lehitchadesh. What Hashem wants from us is to somehow some way, find a way to energize, even when physically energizing is impossible, to find our way to create a new mindset. V'zu ha-mitzvah harishona b'Torah. And that's why it says in Tivot Shalom, why Hashem commanded the first mitzvah ever to be given to the Jewish people is the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh, the mitzvah of the new moon. Sha'afilu b'tachlit hashachut be'ein shum keren or laha'ir afilato, even at a time of darkness, in the beginning of the month, when you can barely see the moon at all, when the darkness is so intense and so great. Yitchadesh Yehudi k'biryah chadasha. A Jew has the ability to energize himself as a new being. That's when we make it real. That's when we internalize what we've gained. Those moments are not just moments to get through that part of the month, to get through that part of the calendar, to get through those days, but it is specifically then that growth can take place. If I could share with you, I'm not going to read it inside, but if I could share with you the example that the Degel Machane Ephraim brings. He cites the example of a person that's learning to walk, a baby that's learning to walk. The way that we teach a child to walk is first we hold their hands so that they can feel and experience what it means to put one foot in front of the other. And then slowly we retract one hand, and then slowly we retract the other, forcing the child to walk on his own. Sometimes that child might fall, he might, but that's how he learns to walk. We don't consider, if somebody says, "Oh, he's so cute, is he walking yet?" The answer is only yes if he walks on his own. The answer is not yes if I still need to hold on to him. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us times where we sometimes feel like he let go. That period of time is the time in which we have the ability to learn to walk on our own. Yes, there are times where things are very inspiring. Go back to the image of the calendar that we looked at. There are times where we have lots of brightness, holidays all the time. The flash of inspiration of a Seder or of a Ne'ilah of Yom Kippur. But the goal is not to live in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The Kohen Gadol only went in there one day a year. The goal is to take the inspiration and live with it every single day. There are just as many winter months, and they are just as important because it is during that time that we learn to walk. We have a lot of ups and downs. And the goal is not just to wait for the period of time to be over. The goal of the 3 weeks is not just to wait for the 3 weeks to be over so that we can celebrate Shabbos Nachamu. The goal of galut, of exile, is not just to wait it out. All of these years are for nothing. The goal of the dark period of our month is to teach us to create light. I want to show you a different view of our calendar. I showed you a very simplistic view of our calendar earlier. I want to show you another view of our calendar. This is the same calendar. The Shalosh Regalim are in pink and everything else colored in other ways. And really it's the same half of the year because really it's half the year and half the year, but I want to show you a more nuanced view of our calendar. We have a Pesach where we build through Sfirat HaOmer to Shavuot. And then about a month later, we plunge into the morning of the 3 weeks. after which we experience the intensity of the Yamim Noraim. Then we celebrate Sukkot, ending with Simchat Torah, and then we carry it all through the winter. In those winter months, Chazal instituted a Chanukah and a Purim. You know what the goal of Chanukah and Purim is? It's to teach us how to create light in times of darkness. It's to teach us how to find God in the story of our lives, even when he seems absent from the storyline at first. It's to teach us to see the presence of Hashem, even when it's dark. There are times on our calendar, half our calendar is full of holidays and inspiration. And half our calendar is learning how to take inspiration and bring it into everyday life. That's what we're supposed to do. Because life will not always be one big high. Because we will not always feel inspired. And we will not always see brightness. But there is always opportunity for growth. And as Jewish people, that's what we do. As a nation and as individuals, that's what we do. That's what we do. And I want to pose a simple question. Who says that the inspired prayer of the high holidays is necessarily worth more than the prayer on an average Tuesday or Wednesday? Who says that the matzah that we eat at a Seder, even though we only get to do it once a year, is worth more than the challah that I eat every Friday night as I sanctify my Shabbat table? Who says? Yes, we have moments that come along just once a year. And those moments that are sporadic are supposed to inspire us, lift us. We have moments of inspiration in our lives where we see Hashem so clearly. Thank you for the gift. And there are times where it feels very average and very empty. But on those days, when we build inspiration on those days, or when we simply keep moving, and when we remain stubbornly committed to who we are and who we're trying to be, that's also a key to greatness. My bracha to all of us is that as we experience the normal ups and downs of our lives, as we experience the light and dark, that we find God in both places. And we find our own greatness in both places. And may it be that Hazorim B'dima, those who continue to plant through the tears, Berina Yiktzoru, those will rejoice, will harvest with rejoicing as we reap the ultimate benefit. Thank you.